Hi, I'm Alessia, and you're about to watch a message that was preached at Calvary Fellowship in Miramar, Florida. At Calvary, we exist to help you take your next step with God. If you'd like to learn more about Calvary, make sure to download our mobile app on the App Store or Google Play Store by searching up My Calvary.
So how's everybody doing? We are glad that you're here. So when I was finishing high school, I used to work at this hoagie shop. Now, can I ask, how many of you know what a hoagie is? All right, several of you. Now, for those of you that don't know, or you just didn't have enough energy to raise your hand, a hoagie is basically a sub, but when I grew up in the Northeast, in New England in particular, and so you didn't call them subs. You called them hoagies, or if you're really hardcore, you called them grinders, which is another thing altogether. That's another sermon. But anyway, but I worked at this hoagie shop when I was in high school, which made like Philly cheesesteaks and all that kind of stuff. And so the way it would work is that there would be a lunch rush, and then things would kind of calm down for from like 2:30 to 5:30, and then there'd be a dinner rush. And so during that time, you'd have to prep everything and get it ready for dinner. Well, anyway, we had, the owner of the shop, he would be with us during the lunch rush, and then he would leave for a little while, and then he would come back before dinner. But one day, he was out of town, and so he put us in charge. And so after the lunch rush, and we knew he wasn't coming back because he was in Delaware at the time. So we're like, okay. So after the lunch rush, we went to the front door and we flipped the sign to closed, and we turned off the lights and locked the door. And then we started a poker tournament in the dining area. Now, when I say a poker tournament, I don't want you to think this was like high stakes. These are all people that were making like $5 an hour. So there wasn't like tons of money going around. But anyway, so so what happened was, and I didn't even realize, I don't think any of us realized how long this was going on, but then the phone started ringing because it was like 5 o'clock, and people were calling in orders that they wanted delivered at dinner time. And so someone would get up, like, oh, deal me out of this hand. They'd get up, they'd write down the, whatever the order was and put it on the line. Well, anyway, the line was totally full of orders and we were still playing. And then we hear this door slam in the back. And it turns out Paul was not in Delaware, at least not anymore. And he came in and he saw what was going on. And there's really no excuse as to what you can do when the phone's ringing off the hook. There's a line full of orders that need to be made, and you and your friends are sitting and you're all holding 5 cards. And so he wasn't happy. And he started throwing things at us, and he said some words I can't repeat in church. And then after that day, every time that he left, he would say, I'm leaving, but I will be back when you least expect it. So we're going to fast forward months now. And months later, I'm in college, and I'm driving home from a class on Friday night. And as I'm driving, I'm hungry, and I'm like, I'm going to stop at the shop and make myself some mozzarella sticks. So I get there. I go behind the counter, and I make the mozzarella sticks, get myself something to drink, and then I'm standing there at the counter just talking, because we're all friends, we all worked there. So I was off that night because I had class, and then they were working, so we're talking, and then Paul shows up, and he's like, he tells my friend Drew, who was working behind the counter, he was in charge that night, and he's like, and they called me Bobby there, and he's like, why did you let Bobby behind the counter? Why did you let him drop those mozzarella sticks? Why did you let him get his own soda? He wasn't working. And why did you not make him pay for it? And I'm like this. I'm in total shock. And so anyway, he makes my friend Drew pay for it, which I'm fine with because, once again, it's still free for me. And then I say, Paul, listen, I'm sorry that this happened, but can I just ask, how did you know? This was like before surveillance. I mean, we were still writing on tablets of stone back then. And I'm like, how did you know? And he said, and there was a Shoney's. I don't know if you remember that restaurant, Shoney's. If you don't, you didn't miss anything. But he's like, you see the Shoney's over there? I've been in the Shoney's parking lot watching you through my binoculars. And I've watched everything that's gone on here. And Like, first of all, how weird is that? That he's watching us through his, like, dude, you need a hobby. But the other thing is that what would I have done had I known? I mean, honestly, I just would have kept driving. I wouldn't even have stopped if I knew some weirdo is watching us in binoculars. But the thing is this, and this is the real challenge, is I certainly would not have disobeyed what he had told us to do. And that's what I want to drill down on in our time together, is that we've been in this series. This is part 3 of a series that we've been doing called Spoiler Alert, and we've been talking about Bible prophecy, and we've been talking about even more specifically the words of Jesus in reference to his return. And in this series, we've been talking about the conditions of the world at the time of Jesus. And if you're here for the first time, don't worry, we're not one of those churches that's like, he's coming back on March 8th. That's not, which by the way, I guess is this week. Doesn't that be something? But anyway, we're not one of those churches. But we do believe that Jesus is coming back because he didn't give us a date and a time, but he gave us indications as to what the world would look like. And so, and you would think that as Christians, and the challenge is that, are you ready for him to return? And I think as Christians, we kind of think about, I guess I'm excited about him to return because I want everything that's wrong in the world made right, and we want to see justice for injustice. But sometimes, I think we could be honest, we could say, we aren't excited. I remember when I was single, and my wife and I were dating, and I'm like, Jesus, I know you're going to come back, but could you come back after I get married? Specifically after my honeymoon? Just after that, I'm good. But, just if you just wait a little bit until after that, and then you get married, and then you're like, well, Jesus, maybe you could come back after I have kids because, I want to be a dad. And so maybe you could come back after I have kids. And then you have kids. And now you're like, Jesus, please come back. These kids are driving me crazy. To beam me up. And that's what happens. But see, what happens is that, and this is the thing that Jesus is going to tell us, is that what we believe is seen in our actions. Because those who believe that Jesus could come back today, we live a certain way. And those who believe that Jesus, will he, but I don't think he will, we will begin to live a different way. And that is at the heart of what we're going to talk about today, and at the heart of when we close the series. And I know you're saying, we're closing the series next week. The next time we meet, we're going to close the series. And I know you might be thinking that, no, but I have so many questions. Listen, we're going to wrap it all up and put it in a bow, and you're really, it all makes sense now. So anyway, we're going to do that for you. But it's really going to undergird this idea, because this is the point of what Jesus is talking about, that when it comes to anything in life, but certainly Jesus' return, our behavior is a reflection of our beliefs. Our behavior is a reflection of our beliefs. That's true when it comes to the return of Jesus, and that's true in any area of life. In fact, Jesus would say it this way in Luke chapter 6. He says, a good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good. An evil man out of the evil treasures of his heart brings forth evil. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. What is in you will come out in your words, your actions, and that's just the truth, right? Because we can say we believe something, but if we do not act on it, we miss it. If we don't act on it, then we don't really believe it. I mean, do you remember a few years ago when the Surgeon General came out and said, we're going to stop writing that cigarettes are bad for you. We're going to start putting these little illustrations of what happens. And so they drew these gruesome pictures of this is what happens to your body when you smoke. And they're like, this is what'll scare everybody straight to not smoke. And you know what they found was not just having the words, but now having this gruesome picture of, this person or whatever, that what happens is that it didn't change at all. It didn't make anybody stop smoking or start or anything. It didn't change. Why? Because a person only quits when they realize it's not just knowing it, it's believing it. And when you actually believe it, it transforms your behavior. This is true in relationships. I mean, does a person love you when they say they love you, and is that all that it takes for them to say that they love you? Or does there have to be some level of action attached to the love that we profess? Well, obviously, we would agree that there has to be some level of action, because saying it is easy, but if it's real, you will do something about it. Your actions and your beliefs have to match. And this is true in every area of life, and we recognize that, but this should also be true when it comes to the return of Jesus. What does it do? What does it mean? And if that's the case, should the return of Jesus, should it make us afraid? I don't think so, because the return of Jesus in the scriptures, Paul says this later on in the New Testament, he says that it should bring us comfort and bring us hope. It also, should it cause us to become like survivalists? You know, the guys that are stocking up, arms and ammo, the guys that are buying thousands of cans of Spam and tuna fish so that they can survive the end. And by the way, I don't think it's going to work out the way they say, but if it does, dinner is ruined. Because all these people have been stocking up our Spam and tuna fish. And I don't know, first of all, Hormel, the company that makes Spam, the only thing that's keeping them alive, keeping that company in business, are the survivalists. Because nobody's eaten a can of Spam in 25 years. They're just all stocking it up for the end of time. And I don't know when the last time, you're like, what do you want for dinner? We don't have any Spam, do we? I'm like, as a matter of fact, we have 8,000 cans in the garage because we're waiting for the apocalypse. Well, let's break one out. We got, some to burn. And so, right, nobody's having that conversation. Why? Because that's not the point. The point is that it should bring us comfort, and the reality of Jesus' return, here's what it should do. It should cause us to live differently. It should cause us to live differently in relationships and interactions and decisions that we make. And that's what Jesus is going to show us. So we're going to start in Matthew 24. Starting in verse 36, here's what we read. He says, "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days of Noah before the flood, there was eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. And so also will the coming of the Son of Man be." Now, if you pause there and give me your attention, there's three things we're going to look at as far as are we ready or not when it comes to the return of Jesus. Here's the first one, and that is that the time of Jesus' return feels like normal life. Sometimes because we read about scripture passages that speak of the end, we think that everybody's going to realize that they're living in the end. And that's actually not the case. Jesus says that everybody's going to think it's business as usual. That, hey, well, the people are marrying. Oh, hey, are you invited? You going to the reception? And there's hey, they're eating and drinking. Oh, are you going to this new restaurant? It's so good. It's going to be business as usual. And by the way, let me just say this one thing that I think is important to note. I know that there might be some, and maybe you're here and you're like, well, I don't believe that Noah's Ark or whatever, the flood, is actually a real thing, and hasn't that been scientifically proven, which it has not. But I will say this, and this is, I think, a good thing to know, that, over 90 cultures that have no connection to each other all have a story in their history about a worldwide flood, one man and his family surviving. But that's not even why I think is the best reason to believe that the flood happened. I believe the best reason to believe that the flood happened is because Jesus believed that the flood happened. And when you rise from the dead, I'm just going with what you say. So that's my thinking on it. But wherever you land on it, here's what I'd say, is that I think we can all agree that Jesus is talking about a story at a particular time in the Jewish scriptures. And what he's making this point that everybody, before this catastrophic thing happened, everybody thought it was business as usual. Everything looked normal. But under the surface, the culture was rotting. And the only people that could see it are the ones who were looking for it. So what were the days of Noah like? And I want to drill down on this a little bit. And I want to show you four things about the days of Noah that I think are going to be of interest and importance for us. The first is this, is that the time of Noah was a time of population explosion. In Genesis 6:1, it says this: "It came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth." Now, here's how population has exploded in the last, 150 years or so. So we start with the time of Noah. We have no idea when that was. And so, some people say it was a few thousand. Some people say it was 100,000 or more. We're not really sure. People have theories, but I think we can all agree it was a while back, all right? So, but from the time of Noah to 1867, in 1867 is when we hit on this planet 1 billion people. Now, that's an important thing to note. So we finally hit 1 billion people. Then, less than 70 years later, to 1935, we got to 2 billion people. We doubled the population in just under 70 years. 30 years later, didn't take that long, to 1965, we got to 3 billion people. Now, we go 30 years more from 1965 to 1995, and we not just added a billion, we literally doubled the population and went from 3 billion to 6 billion people. From 1995 to where we are today, we're at 7.1 billion people on this planet. And scientists say that between now and 2050, we'll be at 9.8 billion people. And I don't know about you, but I start asking the question, and that is, how many people can live on planet Earth? I mean, how many people are we built for? And scientists believe, they estimate somewhere between 9 billion, possibly maxing out at 10 billion people. So listen, we get to 2050, if you and I are still around in 2050, I can tell you this, that it's going to be a sold-out show, standing room only. I mean, it's going to be a full house, all right, literally on the planet, because we are going to be at capacity or beyond capacity, because what we're experiencing is population explosion. Now, if you've ever said, man, I wish there was something in the Bible that was like science fiction, you're about to get your wish right now, because of the second thing that that we see in the time of Noah. It wasn't just a time of population explosion. Number two, it was a time of sexual confusion. Let me explain what I mean. In chapter 6, verse 1, it says, "It came to pass when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh. His days shall be 120 years. And there were giants," and you may want to circle that, we're coming back to it, "on the earth in those days, and afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and bore children to them, and those were mighty men who were of old, men of renown." Now, if you want to do this, circle that phrase, sons of God, which you see there in the later verses. You see that phrase, sons of God. Now you want to circle that. You might want to write this Hebrew phrase down. The Hebrew phrase is B'nai Elohim, B-N-A-I E-L-O-H-I-M, B'nai Elohim. It is only used one other time in the Bible, in the book of Job, when it talks about B'nai, the sons of God, is always spoken in reference to angels. In the book of Job, it talks about the sons of God, that is, angels presenting themselves before God in heaven. And so, now this is where the Bible's going to go all X-Files on us. So this is all, we're going to go Mulder and Scully on this. So just FYI. So now this is what many Bible scholars believe, because this is a very interesting thing. You have sons of God, which is universally understood to mean angelic beings, having relationship with human women, and the result are these giants. Now, giants is a very unfortunate translation of a Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is nephal, and the word nephal means fallen one. And so, and then if you want to pluralize that, because they were giants, they were called Nephalim or Nephilim. And so the idea is that you have this kind of hybrid between this angelic being and human beings, and you might say, like, wow, that's really weird, and I would agree. And guess what? The Bible thinks it's weird too. God says it's weird. That's one of the primary reasons why the flood came, to wash this whole business away, and that's why this one family gets saved, who probably, it's very possible, is the only family that's not contaminated by this union. And so, but the point is this, and there's a lot more that can be said on that, and many books have been written on that topic. But here's the thing that I would say, and that is that this was a time of sexual confusion, and the world that you live in, that you and I live in right now, is a world that is very confused. And if you don't agree with me, I would encourage you to go on a college campus and just ask one simple question, right? You may want to write it down. Here's a simple question. How many genders are there? Now, let me tell you why. Like, you would think, someone sent me this the other day, a chart that there are actually 50 genders. And they just gave me all these different combinations. And I'm like, man, I'm so simple. You know, I just believe in the deuce. You know, just the two. And here's the thing, and I don't say this to poke fun. I say this because we live in a culture where the most basic of things have now gotten so convoluted and confused that, and this is all, part of a greater problem that we have as a culture. And this is what leads to the next thing, which is what we see in verse 5, which says, "Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." That word intent in another translation in the Old King James is that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And so that's the third thing, and that is that it was a time of evil imaginations. And what I mean by that, when we talk about imaginations involves the word images. And that people are not only thinking evil, but have the ability to engage in evil through images. And that has never been possible until our generation. Listen, studies show that the average teenager is exposed to close to 200,000 deaths through television, movies, video games, and any other kind of social media. And this is why, as a culture, we become desensitized to it. This is also why one of the studies that show that, these are kids in middle school. I'm not even talking about college students or high school students. I'm talking about middle school students are having difficulty having normal relationships because of the proliferation and accessibility of pornography. And so what happens is, and listen, let me tell you why this is just, it should, as parents especially, should be alarming to us. But we live in a culture where the proliferation of pornography, people see it as, it shows that we're sexually free and we're not repressed like former generations. No, what it really is killing us as a culture. Listen, when I was in my early 20s, that was around the time that Viagra started doing commercials, and we would all, me and my friends, we would kind of chuckle at it, like, isn't that so funny? Not funny, but weird because that's what you do when you're 20, when you're still like a kid, you kind of giggle at things like that. And you're like, oh, that's so, far down the road, if ever, whatever. And what happens is, listen, here's what happens. And here's what all kinds of research that comes out is that there are kids that are teenagers, late teens, early 20s, that are all suffering from erectile dysfunction and all kinds of things that you should not be dealing with when you're a teenager, when you're a high schooler, when you're a college student. Why? Because of pornography addiction. And so and this is the thing, listen, these are not Christians saying this. These are secular doctors and psychologists saying that the cure for this is that you got to stop watching this altogether because it's killing you from the inside. And this is the thing that God's been saying all along. That this you got to get away from this. And here's the important thing is that these evil imaginations are killing us as a culture. But I want you to understand this. This isn't because God is a prude. This isn't because God is just horrified by the idea of sexuality or sex. But when he talks about sex within the context of a married relationship between a man and a woman, he's saying, listen, anything other than that is going to harm you. And what we realize is, listen, people that aren't even Christians are recognizing the wisdom that the Bible has been talking about all along. Last one. Number 4, it was a time of widespread violence. In verse 11, you'll see this. It says, "And the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence." Now, that word violence in Hebrew is the Hebrew word Hamas, Hamas. If you don't know what the largest terrorist group or one of the largest terrorist groups in the Middle East, you know what their name is? Hamas. And they, this year, graduated 13,000 youths from their terrorist program, which is double what they had the year before. And listen, we hear about so many bombings and shootings that we have almost become desensitized to it. That's how much violence is in our world. And here's what Jesus says: everybody's going to think it's business as usual, but only people who can make the connection and see what's happening below the surface, you're going to have an inside track to really understand what's happening. And that's where, remember, he says this, and this is an important thing to note. He says that the flood came and it took them all away, which that is an important thing to understand for the next section we're going to look at. Look at verse 40. He says, "Then 2 women will be in the field, one will be left, and one will be taken, and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming, but know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Now pause there and give me your attention. Here's the second thing, and that is that the time of Jesus' return warns us to keep watch. Now there's some confusion here, and that is, okay, is being taken a good thing and being left a bad thing? Or is being left a good thing and being taken the bad thing? Which is the good thing here? Now, here's the good news, is that Jesus talked about this with his disciples, and Luke gives us a record in his gospel and gives us a little extra detail that we don't get in Matthew's gospel. Here's what he says. It's in your notes. He says, whoever tries to keep his life will lose it. Whoever loses their life will preserve it. And I tell you, on that night, 2 people will be in one bed. One will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding grain together. One will be taken and the other left. Where, Lord? That's what they ask. And here's what he says. Where there is a dead body, there the vultures will gather. Now to understand this, we got to understand how vultures work. I don't know if you've ever seen a vulture at work. I hadn't seen a vulture at work until about 5 years ago. And one day, I open up the blind. My daughter Mia, this is like 5 years ago. My daughter opens up the blinds in our kitchen, and she's like, wow, Dad, look, there's this giant bird in our kitchen. And I look, and I'm like, Mia, that's not a bird, that's a vulture. And she says, oh, cool. I'm like, yeah, it is pretty cool. And I walk away, and I go, wait, why is a vulture in my yard? And that should have been my first question. So I walk outside, and I have these pavers in part of my backyard. And so I go outside, and on the pavers, I see a trail of blood all along, and I mean, it's nasty. I see this trail of blood, and I see this vulture kind of flying, and then I look at the end of the trail of blood, and there is this possum, giant, I mean, huge possum, and this possum is wounded. He's got like a big chunk taken out of him. He's bleeding profusely, and apparently the, vulture's taken a few bites out of him, and he's a goner. So then the possum stops moving, and he's gone. Like, all right, this thing has died, and I don't know exactly where possums go when it's all over. Possibly Armadillo, Texas. Who knows, right? Who knows? So, nobody knows. But anyway, but now I have a problem. I have a dead possum in my backyard and a trail of blood. And I got to figure out what I'm going to do. And I've got 50 people coming over later that day for my youngest daughter, Livy's, second birthday at the time. So now I'm going to tell you what I did. But before I tell you what I did, we have to have an understanding. And that is that you are not going to judge me for what I'm about to tell you. All right? So this was 5 years ago. This is what I did. Now, today, I'm in a different place emotionally. And I'm not saying that this is what I would do today. I'm just saying that that's what I did. And so if you say, well, I have a problem with that, then you have a problem with past Bob. But leave present Bob alone. Okay? If we can all agree on that? All right, very good. I'm going to take your silence as an affirmation. So, all right. So here's what you have to understand is that I live at the end of my community. So there's this large retaining wall that is at the end of my community. And so here's kind of how it works, is that anything on my side of the wall is my responsibility. But on the other side of the wall, I have a homeowners association that I pay way too much money to for very little work. But if it's on their side, it's their responsibility. So I'm outside and I'm looking at this possum, and I say to myself, if he were like 5 feet over, he wouldn't be my problem. Because the other thing that I have is that maybe you have this, but I don't have a mechanism in my life to deal with the carcass of a dead animal. Maybe you do. I don't have that. And so I don't know how I'm going to deal with this carcass. I also don't know how I'm going to get CSI to come to my house and clean up all these, the murder scene from this vulture. So I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So anyway, I go into my garage and I grab a shovel. And I go to my backyard, and my daughter Mia, she's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, just relax, I'm taking care of this business. Anyway, so I walk out, and the vulture is still flying around, and my daughter, she's still just before she turns 7, and she's banging on the window. She's like, don't do it! It's not worth your life! And which, by the way, if you haven't had a 7-year-old tell you that, you're really not living on the edge. And so, anyway, I decide that I'm going to approach the possum from the back. So I grab the shovel, and my plan is that I'm just going to scoop him and then send him over the wall, or as some might call it, deportation. All right? So, I'm sorry. Some things just come to me. Sometimes the Spirit's moving at 1 o'clock in such a way. So anyway, this is why, 1 o'clock is not a great time for church, but it's like, yeah, but this doesn't happen at 9. So that's why you guys are here at 1. So anyway, I've got my dreams of deporting this possum. And so I'm like, all right, I know what I'm going to do, and I just got to flip it, and it'll go. And I go to scoop him, and as I go to scoop him, he goes, and he, teeth out, eyes open, and I yelled. And if you ask my daughter Mia to tell you the story, it's like, yeah, and then the thing showed his teeth, and then my dad screamed like a little girl. And I'm like, you weren't there! And so, anyway, by the way, playing possum is a real thing. So beware. They're trying to lure you into a false sense of security before you become their victim. Anyway, so if you learn nothing else at church, I'm like, I learned I got to watch out. These possums are out for real. So anyway, so I don't know what I'm going to do at this point. I put my shovel away, and I'm like, obviously that's not going to happen, or I'm going to die. And then my family's going to throw me on the other side of the wall because they're not going to know how to deal with that. So what happens is that I do what every normal person would do. I just go on Google, and I'm like, I have an injured possum. What do I do? Listen, somebody is a master at Google AdWords because 3 companies come up of critter removal. So I just go on the websites and I just start looking at the reviews. And I'm like, and there was one, this guy had handled, I think the guy like, hey, we had this rhino and he took care of it. I'm like, listen, if you got a rhino, you can handle this. So I call the guy and I meet him at the front of my house, and he shows up in his truck and he has the thing wrapped, and he's got pictures of all these critters, and there's a possum on there. And I'm like, oh, this guy knows what he's doing. But I told him, and I'm like, look, man, I realize you're a professional, but I just want you to know that I was in this. And things didn't work out for me to do this, which is why I called you. And anyway, this is all me trying to regain my man card after screaming the way I did. And so I'm like, look, I'm just telling you, from my experience, that thing is deadly. So nonetheless, he says, okay, no problem. And then he's like, why don't you just write the check out now? And I didn't realize that was going to be a problem. So I give him the check, and I hand it to him, and then he goes in the back. And so I tell him the thing's deadly, and I'm like, so you may want to bring out your heavy-duty equipment. He's like, oh, yeah, that's right. So he just grabs the flimsiest cage I've ever seen. He walks to my backyard, and I'm walking pretty far behind him, and because I'm just, I don't want to be in this mix. So he drops the cage. He walks up to the possum, just picks him up by the tail. The possum doesn't even move, doesn't even react, which just goes to show you that I wore him out. And so I'm like, come on. And so he just grabs him, puts him in the cage, and he's like, all right, man, we're good. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. We need to negotiate this. I just wrote you a check for $99. I only saw $5 worth of work. I need a rebate. Anyway, it didn't work out. And I don't know what happened to the possum after that. I like to think that he received medical attention, is now living with his family in Boca Raton. But who knows? But here's the point. Here's the point, and there is a point. Is this, listen, Jesus says that where there is a dead body, or another translation, where there is the carcass, that's where the vultures are going to be. The vulture shows up to grab the body and take it away for the purpose of destruction. And this is what is happening. And sometimes you think, well, is there being the person taken, is that a good thing? No, it's not a good thing. They're being taken to judgment. Those who are left to enter the kingdom of God. So what's the point of this whole thing? The point of this whole thing, he says, to stay vigilant. In fact, this is the literal translation in verse 42. He says, watch, therefore. It's not just watch to observe like you're watching TV. It's be vigilant. Because listen, too many Christians, we live lives that are disengaged. And living a life that's vigilant means that we filter everything through the lens of Jesus' return. The words that we use, the decisions that we make, the level of integrity that we have. Because when we believe that Jesus is coming, listen, we live a life that's ready for his return. And if we don't, then this is what Jesus says next. This is what will happen to us in verse 45. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his master made ruler over his household to give them food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, will find so doing. Assuredly, I say to you that he will make him ruler over all his goods. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants, to eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he's not looking for him, and at an hour that he is not aware of, and he will cut him in two and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites, and there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, if you pause there and give me your attention, here's the last thing, and then we're going to start bringing it to a close, and that is this. The time of Jesus' return challenges us to be faithful and wise. Faithful and wise. Now, this is such a powerful parable that Jesus tells, and it gets lost on us because we don't have a word to translate this powerful Greek word. In verse 48, he says, but if that evil servant says, that you might want to circle that word evil. That word evil in the Greek language is this Greek word kakos, K-A-K-O-S. And that word kakos doesn't just mean like they're bad. What it means is that they once were good, but turned evil. So there's a process here. It's the picture. It's the picture of something that was good, but now isn't. Like a guitar that's out of tune, or like an apple that has rotted. And so the idea is this. What happened to cause this servant to become kakos, to turn evil? He had this belief. And here's what the belief was. He says this, my master delays in his coming. And look at what happens. There's three things that happen when he believes that. The first thing is this. And this is what happens to us if we believe that. Number one, we will offer up excuses to do God's will. The first thing the servant does is forget what his master told him to do. And listen, this is what happens. When you became a Christian, if you're still here, that means God has a work for you to do. You're not just here to kind of hang out and arrive safely at the end of your life to just go to heaven. No, there is a work that God has for you to do. Jesus said he came to seek and save people who were lost. But if we miss it and we forget that we have a mission and a work that the master has for us, we will start thinking, oh, but I could serve, but I'm so busy, or I don't want to get burnt out. But listen, I want to tell you something. No one wants to be standing on the sidelines when the master arrives. So let me challenge you in something. Grab your connection card. Grab it. Grab your connection card. I'm going to show you this real quick. On the back of your connection card, third one down, it says, my next step is serve at Calvary. And let me tell you why this is important. Because you have gifts and talents, and when you decide to serve, here's what takes place. Church no longer becomes just about you. It no longer becomes just about you receiving, but instead it becomes you receiving and then using your gifts to help and bless and encourage somebody else. And there's this now reciprocal nature that happens. Someone uses their gifts to bless you. You use your gifts to bless the rest of the church body. And that's how it works. What happens too is all the way at the bottom, to sign up for Calvary's membership class. Now, let me tell you why this is important. And there's been people that we've talked to, and this is what they say. I've been around this. I've been at this church for years. I don't need to go to the membership class. Of course you do. You especially need to go. You know why? Because if you've been around this church for a long time and you've never been to the place where we talk about, here's how you grow. Here's how we make decisions as a church. These are the things that we value most. And by the way, our membership class is just the first of a series of classes that we do. And we talk about spiritual growth, and we talk about spiritual gifts, and we talk about leadership. And for you to continue serving and growing and having positions and opportunities, that's all involved you making a decision to say, I want to be part of this house. I don't want to just come to this house. I want to be part of the house. I want to be, God willing, to become a pillar in the house. Because if you don't, let me tell you what the future looks like. No, I'm just going to attend. That's it. I don't need that. I'm just going to attend. Okay, you're going to attend. And you know what's going to happen after a season of time? You'll stop attending. You won't start attending as much. And then something else is going to start looking very appealing. And then next thing you know, you're going to be in this and you're like, how in the world did I get here? How did I get in this? And it's because you never connected yourself to a group of believers and said, hey, I'm with you and you're with me and we're in this together. Listen, it's so much more than just going to a class. This is us saying, hey, we're in this together. But here's the second thing that will happen. It's not that he starts to offer up excuses, avoiding God's will. The second thing that we'll do is we'll begin to beat up other believers. That's what the evil servant does. He starts beating up fellow servants because he doesn't believe that there's going to be any repercussions. What happens is in the church is we stop being servants and start becoming critics. And we start talking about all the things that we don't like, and we start railing on other believers, thinking that railing on other believers makes us look spiritual and mature, when all it does really is reveal our immaturity. You see, your maturity is not revealed by your smarts, but instead by your level of sacrifice. And you never grow to maturity thinking everything is about you. Jesus said if you want to find yourself, you've got to lose yourself. That it isn't about you. That's how you become great in the kingdom. And then lastly, here's the other thing that we'll do, is that we'll cozy up with sin. It says he begins to eat and drink with the drunkards. Listen, he doesn't start there. The reality is that what takes place is that, right, nobody jumps into the deep end of the pool with sin. No. You start playing on the shallow end. And then you just kind of start flirting with it in these little compromises. And what happens is most of the time, we don't even realize we're in the deep end of the pool and we're in real trouble until we get really stuck and we're in something we can't get out of. And it all begins with these little compromises that all could have been avoided if we simply remembered. If we simply remembered. And that's what communion does. It reminds us not just of what Jesus has done, but of what he's going to do when he returns. And I'm going to invite the ushers to come forward and hand out the communion elements. And here's what I want to encourage you in these last few moments that we have. I want to encourage you, I want us to think through our lives, and I want us to think through the work that God wants to do in us, that for some of us, if we're living in light of his return, we're pressing into the things that he has for us. And if we're not, then let me tell you what happens. We start doing these things. We start playing in the shallow end of compromise. We start criticizing. We start having attitudes and actions and decisions that, oh yeah, he delays in his coming. It's not a big deal and all that. And listen, maybe this moment of communion is our opportunity to wave goodbye to that and really press in and watch God do something amazing in our lives. Make commitments that'll transform us from who we are to who God wants us to become. So take the communion elements, hang on to them, and when the band has sung, we're going to partake together. Pastor George, lead us.
Thanks for watching this week's message. Make sure to click the subscribe button below to stay up to date with all the things happening here at Calvary. God bless you.